Hello, folks. Welcome to the fourth installment of the Weave in the New World lecture series with guest curator, Mr. Mark Winter. And yes, and if you're wondering why you can't hear anything with me talking into the microphone, it's because this is actually just going to the digital world, not to a PA in this room. So this is for future generations to enjoy. So welcome to the Couse-Sharp Historic Site. I realized in every introduction that we've done so far, I never introduced myself. I'm the executive director and curator of the Couse-Sharp Historic Site, Davis and Kernan. So thank you everyone for coming. This has been absolutely so a few little bits of housekeeping before we head into the fun stuff. We want to thank our sponsors, the J3 Fund of Taos, Fighting Bear Antiques of Jackson, Wyoming, Medicine Man Gallery of Tucson, Ray and Judy Dewey of Santa Fe, and Don Q. Lamb of Chicago. So they've made this lecture series and the exhibition possible. We will have snacks and stuff after the lecture over in the London Research Center in my office. We have brochures, newsletters here and in the LRC. Restroom, one right here and two in the Research Center. Mark has brought more free books on that first table, so don't be shy. We also have a couple books for sale. Oh, and donations are always grateful.
We had to say that.
We have no endowment and we rely on friends like you. So if you like what we're doing, help us out and tell friends. We also have a sign-up sheet for our newsletter. That's the best way to keep abreast of all the programming and stuff that we do. And then I should mention that all of our events, programs, tours are free to the public. Yeah, and Mark's not even pay for this.
Now he tells me. I'm leaving.
So, tonight's talk is mostly going to be focused on the Navajo Diné weaving traditions, and hopefully Mark will put a little bit of plug in for our Pueblo friends as well. Without further ado, my good friend, Mark Winter, textile collector, dealer, scholar, author, honestly, the most passionate person in the American Southwest textile world that I know of. So it's just been a thrill for me to have worked with him on this exhibition and have grown my body of knowledge immensely. And I should mention that he and Linda have also been running the Totalina Trading Post for now 28 years. Sadly, that has come to an abrupt end.
Yeah. That's another story.
But that's another story for another day. But no, thank you everyone for coming, and thank you, Mark.
You guys aren't sick of me yet, huh? So anyway, as you see, we have a whole new group of stuff to go through today. And we did the Saltillos first, and then the Rio Grandes, and then the slave blankets, last night. And so now we're going to talk about, the mainstay of the, the Southwestern textile sort of business and world, which is Navajo. And so the Navajo blankets are generally considered the most highly sought after and most expensive textiles in the world now. You can literally buy a tapestry that's on the wall of King Arthur's court that's 700 or 800 years old for less money than you can buy a Navajo blanket for.
Quality matters.
Yes, and it's pretty amazing. And so the first U.S. surveying expedition, we take over the Southwest land we're sitting in right now under the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848. And basically we sort of prompted a war with Mexico. In Washington, they decided they'd hire Zachary Taylor and just march down to Mexico City and beat up a lot of Mexicans, and basically, when they got there, we took half the country. And that included California, Utah, parts of Texas, New Mexico. And so that's how we got this wonderful thing. And the thing I would like to point out, and I got in a lot of trouble with this, is if you think gold was discovered in California less than a year later, is an amazing coincidence. Manifest destiny, of course. And so they the United States blockaded the San Francisco harbor when we found the gold was there. So Sutter's Mill is another one of those great American myths. And I made the mistake of saying that when I did the talk at the Oakland Museum. Some guy came over and just started blasting me. Young man, well, I'm not that young. He said, I don't know what book you've been reading, but you're totally wrong about all this. And so he started just blasting me for saying it. I'm going, well, I don't know what book you've been reading, but if you believe in coincidences, that's great. So there's this little guy standing there with a hat on, kind of scruffy and everything. He just like the classic anthropologist, archaeologist I could ever imagine. He was just standing listening to this conversation. And after he heard enough of it, he finally said, my name is Robert Ryle Miller, and I'm the head California historian, and he's absolutely right. So that quieted my competition. Anyway, so today we're going to talk about, just a second, about Pueblo weaving. And the Anasazi actually, designed, developed, would be the proper word, of what's called a primitive upright frame loom. And here's a little Navajo version made by one of our weavers in Tobalina. The frame was made by her husband, and she did the weaving on it. And so I'm going to talk just a little bit about it's done in case there's any questions. But it was developed from a backstrap loom, and so this is called a fixed rod. And so you see the foundation is strung back and forth between the rod that's wrapped top and bottom. And then once that's done, the piece is set into a frame and tensioned. And then the weaver sits in front of the piece and weaves. So even the biggest pieces or anything you see today or everything, 9 by 12s, 10 by 15s, are all made on basically the exact same. And so the technique made is called weft face tapestry. The foundation, the strings that run vertical, are called the warp. What is put in is called the weft, hence the term weft face tapestry, because the weft is packed down and completely conceals the warp. That's how all these blankets are made here today. And so once they have a spindle, this is kind of a little shorty, but they'll take this and they'll card the wool out with either, sometimes I've seen really wonderful early Navajo cards that had like thistles in them. And so the thistles would help straighten out the fibers. The idea of the carding and combing is to align the fibers, and then they're spun. And they're spun 2 times. The first spinning Navajos use gives a kind of light, thick, fluffy spin. And from that, they spin it down very fine, depending on whether it's super fine or heavy, whatever weight she wants. But it's always done 2 times. And the Navajo spindle, the ladies will sit and they will literally pull it up their hip. And so all Navajo hand spinning is what's called Z twist. And that's the twist that you get when you pull it that way. So whether a Navajo youth is right-handed or left-handed, it doesn't matter. Their mother or grandmother is going to teach them to spin it right-handed. And that's always, always, always. I've never seen a variation in that. So then to separate the warps is to do the weaving. You separate one set of warps and then the other sets of warps. The rod that's wrapped there is called the pedal, and the little one kind of behind it is called the shed, and they were put in an opposite warp. So depending on which they'll pull forward, they bring one set of warps, the other set of warps, and then they just lay the wefts in. It automatically makes it a weave. once they stretch it, which you can see there, they put in what's called a batten. And this is inserted and then turned so the weaver can get her fingers in to do that, to do it. And then once the threads are laid in there, they pat it down with a comb. And the tools are actually made often by the husbands of the weavers, or we have very specific tool makers that are very popular with us. And so we sell those in the store, as well as the weavers can get them for themselves and the weaver would make them. So, any questions about that before we go on further? Anybody want to come up and try it? Okay. So, anyway, so the size of a piece is determined before it's woven. So this piece would be as big as the frame is that you see, but a larger piece, the frame becomes much bigger, wider, whatever they're really looking for. So the size is determined first, and then the weaving is filled in, and lo and behold, we have a blanket. And so the Anasazi developed it. The Pueblo Indians, which are really, the Anasazi are ancestor in Pueblo, so the Pueblo started using the loom before the Spanish arrived. And so we don't know exact dates because there was nobody there keeping track. But the Pueblos wove primarily what were called mantas that were wove generally because of the way the loom works, they wove them wider than long. And so where they could sit and weave, and so they did what were called mantas. The mantas were usually either brown and white. And the early Pueblos sort of cursed themselves because they had storehouses full of mantas. And the Spanish were so overwhelming with the guns and their horses and all the things that they had with them that the Pueblos offered the Spanish hundreds of mantas that they had in storehouses. And so the Spanish thought that was a fairly cool idea. So they dictated that every Pueblo family would produce 1 to 2 mantas per year for the Spanish king. And so what started out as a tribute, as a gift, became a tribute. So it did little to inspire good weaving that they had to give them away all the time. So mostly those textiles were made fairly plain, like I said, either brown or white, and usually they could be either cotton or wool, depending on. They didn't have wool before the Spanish arrived, so they earlier were cotton. They were wool. One thing the Pueblos could do to personalize the pieces was embroider them, and the Spanish allowed them to do that and to keep. And so they never really wanted the embroidered pieces because they were kind of native design. And so there's a really nice display of early 19th century mantas. I think there's 5 of them in there, and they're shown from different Pueblos and they're identified as such. This is another one that is probably either Jemez Pueblo or maybe Acoma. And so here we show the shape of the manta. This is white cotton. And this has been embroidered with wool in really basically prehistoric style designs. And so this is, when they're fancied up like this, they're usually, I'll get you for a second, usually they're made for ceremonial purposes. So this is what we call a Kachina cave. So the Kachinas wore these. Sir?
Is prehistoric used to mean before the Spaniards got here?
Yes.
Because mostly in my head, when you say prehistoric, it's the dinosaurs.
Well, their prehistoric time lasted a long time. And so,
other people say pre-Columbian.
well, it's 6 1/2 dozen or the yeah. But so as long as you know, when I say prehistoric, that was before they started recording history. So pre-Columbian could be pre-Columbus. So I don't dispute that at all. That's fine. But I'm using the word slightly differently than you might be used to.
I think you should hold this up so we can all see the backside too. That's pretty fascinating.
Oh yeah, you can see where the embroidery attached. And so that's where the wefty that they were embroidering it with just ended up showing. And here's what. A little more sense. It's a little small for me. Linda looks much better. And by the way, this is my lovely wife, Linda, who will be helping me today.
Now, I don't see any lazy ones on
Pueblo's, the term lazy line was a Pueblo term for the not a derogatory kind of dig you term because the Pueblo Indians wove straight across back and forth. Okay. The Navajos wove as far as they could comfortably reach on the same loom, repositioned them loom and or themselves and wove. So they are basically woven sort of in sections. So a lazy line should technically be called a sectional weaving line. And so some of the Navajos don't like that term lazy line because first it was a Pueblo term and it was trying to be a little bit of a dig at the Navajos. One thing we know for sure, Navajos are not lazy. So anyway, I was supposed to bring a few more Pueblo blankets. I forgot. So, but there's a beautiful display of, I think, 5 of them in the museum that shows you some of the different designs that the different Pueblos came up with. Okay, but let's remember the shape. Like the Hispanic blankets were woven longer than wide. The loom here was easier to weave across to something wider than long because it kept you from having to reach too high. So most of the early pieces that came off of the loom were wider than long. Okay, so anyway, sometime around, it's again a speculated thing. It used to feel that when the Pueblo Revolt happened in 1680 and the Spanish came back in 1693, they didn't learn to give up their brutality against the Pueblos. So a lot of Pueblo Indians moved to west. And so there's a whole group that lived near Hopi called Hopi Tewa. And Tewa was the language, one of the languages used by the Rio Grande people. There's a whole group of them that moved there. And so early historians used to feel that it was probably around 1693, early 1700s that the Navajos learned to weave. Joe Ben Wee, who was really the head scholar of Navajo weaving, felt it was earlier because by around 1700 or so, they're described as, doing an excellent weaving. He didn't think they could have become such pros at it in such a short period of time. So he pushed that date back to about 1650 or so, where he felt the Navajos adapted to the loom and started doing weaving. And they stole sheep, and so they had from Spanish and Pueblos, and so they had weaving material, and the rest is history. So anyway, the first real known distinctive type of blanket is what is called the first phase chief's blanket. And in the late 18th century, it's kind of a long story, I'm not going to bore you guys all with it, but ended up in January of 1805 being a Spanish punitive expedition that chased a bunch of Navajos way up in Canyon de Chelly. The northern canyon of Canyon de Chelly is called Canyon de Muerto, which is the canyon of death. And so that's the canyon that the Navajos retreated up in. The Navajos put their women and children and old men up in a cave up on the side of the canyon, and then they retreated back up the canyon, drew the Spanish up, and then disappeared in the rocks and everything. And so the Spanish were going back out. Again, this is January 1805, and this was reported by the Spanish how it happened, but they were going back out and they heard a baby crying, realized that they put their women and children and old people up in this cave. And so they slaughtered 115 Navajos and took 33 slaves, and that was January of 1805. A trader from the reservation by the name of Sam Day discovered that going on the myths and rumors that that existed, went looking for it, and he found it in the early 1900s. He found the spot, and he found the skeletal remains of all the Navajos, and draped around those skeletal remains were blankets. And so those are called the massacre cave blankets. And so those are the first truly dated Navajo blankets that we have, because we know they are from January 1805. In that group is a piece about this big of a Navajo first phase chief blanket. And so we know that was a style by January of 1805 in its fully developed form. That would probably push it back 25, 50 years from that period. But we really don't know. We just know that there was that piece found there.
Were the Spanish uninterested in taking the blankets?
They really
They
never,
didn't want to
they
lose
just
the.
wanted to slaughter them all. They kind of really didn't seem to care. I'm sure they were sort of bloody, but you know, I wasn't there. I don't know the answer to that. It's a thought. Maybe some did. You know, we just don't know. It was never recorded. So anyway, there's only a small handful of Navajo First Phase Chiefs blankets. And we maybe have all seen the Antiques Roadshow where they talked, where the guy, the old guy who was a relative, he claimed with Kit Carson's and stuff, and he got told that that blanket was now bringing about $500,000. And so this is a Navajo First Phase Chief blanket. And so it's beautiful brown, cherry stripes, brown and white, and then has beautiful indigo blue. Every one of these is this exact same mathematical layout where you see 4 groups of double blue bands and the same number of brown and white stripes. There's only one that varies. There's probably 35 or 40 of these in existence. I'm sure there's some hidden somewhere. The Antiques Roadshow mentioning that they were worth $500,000 brought a couple out of them. Obviously. We bought one in Indiana that the people had it. The family was a military family, and they had it in a family about 125 years. And the son saw the Antiques Roadshow, and he was sitting one night watching TV, and he got the blanket out and he laid it out. His mom had it in her closet, and he watched it 3 times, and he goes, "Oh my God, her blanket." He went. He called his girlfriend first and said, "I think we got something valuable." And he woke up his mom and dad, and they all thought cool. And they called the Antiques Roadshow, and they called in Diné, and we went to Indiana and bought it. And that's the last one we found. But these are beautifully fine, and the wool is gorgeous. Here's the idea. I saw the look in your eye. What? Churro. Oh, yeah, here. Oh, no, the churros were brought in 1493 by Columbus. And that's the only wool that was here until. In 1859, the churro were brought into the Rio Grande Valley. And it started what Joe then referred to as the contamination. We agree with that, the pure churros got contaminated out of the merino. And the merino was supposed to be better wool, and it was the prized wool of Spain, but it took solvents to clean it. There's no solvents in the Southwest, and it was a shorter fiber, and so it basically kind of ruined the early churro wool. It starts in 1859, and within 10 or 15 years, sheep, just being sheep, started interbreeding, and so the wool became contaminated. It all helps us date the pieces too.
Has it been restored or cleaned?
No, it's like it's totally original.
It's pristine.
Yeah. Well, yeah, Christine has all the original salvaging and everything. It's a beautiful example, but it was, only in one family for all those years. And so this is the first phase. So anyway, in 1851, under the Stickgraves expedition, a couple of cavalry officers collected blankets, and one of them was the first phase, and the other was what we have come to call second phase. The Navajos didn't use those terms. But here is a classic second phase. And so what's happened is they've added 12 double bars of red. The red is all the bayetta, the raveled cloth. And you can see it's two different colors. Actually, this is a combination of the dark color and a lighter color put together. So we know this style started by 1851. Now, we don't know why they picked those 12 spots to do it. I would speculate in the Navajo way of thinking, they were kind of like chakras or energy points that they accented on the body, because look what happens. So you have lapels, you have cuffs. But every second phase looks just like this practically, instead of the later ones, they kind of started very different. So this is what the people wore, and it was high fashion. From 1851, this style, it's kind of stayed with the Navajo for less than 10 years. And the introduction of red into these early blankets started, developing, and more red developed. Here is another second phase, but it's much more developed version of it. As you see, there's red lines connecting, the double sets of red bars. So this is the next stage. This is probably about 1860 or so. And here, especially note all the different shades of red. So enough red was being gathered to make a whole blanket. And we're familiar with what I'm talking about with the bayetta. Navajos were red men in the red land. They were basically color starved, but they loved the shade of red. And the Spanish had it, they saw it. And so when they would raid the Rio Grande Valley and the Spanish villages, they take every bit of red cloth they could and they take it back to the women. The women would painstakingly take that red cloth apart. The Navajo term for that is bayetta. They didn't practice spectrophotometric analysis of it, or any of these things that people now try to do to date things, but it was just red, and they wanted it. They wanted the red in the blanket.
That's still a second phase?
This will still be a second phase, exactly. So what you really see, if you just see the connecting lines, so it's developing from the first just red bars. So sometime in the late 1850s, the red bars grew together. And we call that a 12-spot pattern. The red bars grew together and merged in the center and started stepping out into the stripes. And so this is called a third phase, and this is probably the most well-recognized blanket of the Navajo. You can see tremendous amount of red color in this. And I will add that this is the first classic Navajo blanket I ever bought in 1977 in Pittsburgh. I paid $1,500 for it. And you see where it still is. And through the increase of price of these and everything, never sort of motivated me to get rid of it. So
They didn't use cochineal?
oh no, they didn't ever get the dye. It's way too expensive, and they didn't know how to use it. So all they got was able to get was red material dyed with cochineal. Is that pretty cool? Yeah. So, I always like to say that I think it was Ralph Lauren that taught him how to do this. And I tend to call this the Ralph Lauren period. So they are an expression of the Navajo. The Navajo, the Diné, considered themselves, as all people do, the people at the center of the earth. And so they were very vocal. Isn't that beautiful? So.
What value would you put on that now?
Now? I don't know, I'm afraid somebody say I'll take it. No, on the market, it's $100,000, $125,000 right now. You could get a similar blanket, you can't get mine.
Not even if we twist your arm?
Probably, yes, you could. it hasn't been twisted hard enough yet, I'll say, since 1977, and I'm still proud to have it, and it's a treat, so. So anyway, let's just hold it out once. What started, the next phase, so to speak, that started happening is the diamonds grew large enough and started coalescing. And the stripes that were, which we saw was the primary part of the blanket, became merely a background to a lot of supplemental designs appearing in it, and the diamonds being very large, and that's what we call the fourth phase. And that's not really written in much literature. I was the first one that actually coined the term in print.
And those are steps?
What?
Those are steps?
Well, that is terrace design, yes.
In which direction was it going?
Wider than long. So it's woven the way we're showing it, the way it's worn. And so that came from the Pueblo loom, weaving them wider than long. The serape, like the Mexican serapes and the Rio Grande serapes, the Navajos started emulating that, but you just got ahead of me. So, anyway, so for themselves, although the women made beautiful blankets for the men, for themselves, they made much more somber garments. This happens to be way too big of one, but this is a women's manta or one-piece dress. And so this is basically what they look like. You had the blue at the ends, the red raveled, and then the large brown center. There you go. So this can be worn as a one-piece dress. This is a little big for my wife. As we can see, that they were worn as a one-piece dress. The Pueblos did the same thing as this. And then a second one was worn as a manta over the shoulders. So if you see early pictures from 1860s, 1870s, this is usually what they're wearing.
That's a lot of leg for a woman.
That's, it's the weaver. Not much I could say. So anyway, these sort of emulate the Pueblo, but the Navajo soon shifted into start weaving two panels. And so we don't know why. It could be speculated that the earlier tech garments that the Navajos wore were deer skin, and so there would have been a deer skin piece in front, a deer skin piece in back. That's what most of the so-called authorities say. And so they came to two pieces. Now these two pieces have been connected down the center. But one of these would have been a front panel, one would have been a back panel, it would have been attached over the shoulders, and actually rather loosely attached down the sides. And the early cavalry officers commented on how loosely attached they were on the sides. So this one's just been put together to really be hung as a piece of art. But these are very, very fine. And if anybody really ever wants to collect Navajo, I'll catch you. Collect Navajo blankets, I always say you should buy one of these because they're incredibly fine, incredibly beautiful, not that expensive relative to a lot of the other Navajo blankets. And so it sort of sets the tone for what you want to do. There's a little bit of indigo green you see right here to accent the blue diamonds.
So these first three phases of Navajo weaving, the designs are pretty much from their culture and not influenced from some other culture?
It's all their concept of what design was. Who knows what spaceship landed and might have influenced it, but yeah, it's generally thought, yes, it's pure Navajo design. We're good? Okay, so now although the women wore the dresses, they also had shawls that they wore on top of the dresses. And so they went through the same changes as the Men's blankets did, but the women's blankets were generally smaller in size and the stripes were narrow rather than the big bold stripes. Now, if you ask Ralph Lauren, he would say to make a person look more petite, you would use smaller designs. To make a person look bolder, you would use bold designs. These guys figured it out long before Ralph Lauren's book. So this is a woman's second phase, chief's blanket. And so it's, rather than white, it's used kind of a comb, they combed a little brown into the white, made it kind of a gray, but then the red is all Valletta. Now this one there. You got it?
You look so petite.
Yeah. Take that one.
What's it?
So that's a woman's second phase, and there are women's first phases, they're very rare though. And then here is a beautiful Valletta. And the nice thing about this is they got two shades of Valletta and how carefully the weaver used it. By the diamonds are a lighter shade of Valletta, but here's a darker shade of Valletta. And this one has white stripes rather than the toned gray stripes of the other one. And so both of these blankets date to about 1865, 1875 here.
Okay.
And I might add that, pretty good, yeah. So anyway, you might add that the second phase, I'll catch you in a second. The second phase blanket was collected by Mary Cabot Wheelwright and given to a niece of hers. So that's where that blanket came from. Sir?
The second and third phase, is there consistency with the number of steps and the pyramids and triangles as there were with the stripe?
No, it would just depend on the width of the blanket and the size of the steps. So it was always sort of just a weaver decision. You see larger scale steps, you see smaller scale steps. One little thing it might tell us is something a little bit about the fingerprint of the weaver that did it. And so if we see, really similarities between two blankets, then they might be possibly the same weaver, but it's really speculative. We don't really know.
Why are they called chief's blankets?
Well, because the early collectors, if you're out in the West and you got an old Navajo blanket and you took it, started riding back home to Ohio or somewhere, you started thinking that you had to have got it from a chief or a princess. It had to be the only two models that came. So it's really a total misnomer and a name for that particular style of blanket. It really has nothing to do with chiefs or anything like that. It just was probably romantic, is all we can really say. So, and the Navajos had their own term for them, and don't ask me to pronounce it, but they, and so the Navajos didn't call them chief's blankets, the people that got them.
Because the Navajos didn't really have chiefs.
They never even had chiefs. Yeah, they had clan leaders, but no chiefs, and that's what made it very difficult to deal with the Navajo, because there was no one person that spoke for the Navajo. There was just clan leaders, and so each clan. So they always had a lot of trouble dealing with the Navajo because no Navajo spoke for them. So they were trying to make treaties with the Navajo, and they couldn't do it because what one clan leader said, another clan leader might not agree with, and so it was very problematic. We're good? You done? No, I got it. Sure, thank you.
Did they ever duplicate, like they came up with a pattern and design on a rug and then they would do that several times, or each one?
No, the weavers are very independent, and so they're all gonna do different things. As we see we definitely see things we think were made by the same maker. It's speculative, but sometimes they have what I call the fingerprint of the weaver, because they're so similar to one another that it's probably not a coincidence. So sometimes you get a little extra coloration and a little extra design and little things that kind of tell you that's it. And then we can take to go study the selvage and the lazy line structure. And so several of those things all tell us a little more about the fingerprint of the weaver, but still pretty speculative, but as we get to the 20th century things, the weaver's fingerprint becomes much more obvious amongst the weave things today. We're good? Okay. Well, as the Navajos were obviously in constant contact with the Spanish, and the Spanish were weaving these long red serapes like we see in the exhibition there, the Navajos emulated them. So they started their own serapes, and their the earliest stuff in them was like Josiah Gregg, one of those 1830s, 1840s, and they were called Serape Navajo. And so here is a Serape Navajo. Big problem. Oops. Uh-oh. Kind of. One of the problems was gaining enough red material to make a whole blanket. Now, this is about 1865 when this blanket's made. You can see all of the various shades of the red bayeta that was gathered to make the whole blanket. So very typical coloration for these. The majority of them are just red, white, and blue. Same as our flag. It's kind of an odd coincidence, but so anyway, these were worn, horizontally or vertically rather than, I guess. See here, yeah, it is. Trying to get out so we can actually see it. See how we're going to have it. Have a blanket on. So this is what we call pure classic novels, just the step terracings and bands. So they're beautifully finely woven. They will basically repel water. And the nicest thing about wool, though, it's equally as thermal wet as it is dry. So even if it did get wet, it's not going to make it cold. It's going to make it wet. So this is probably the most typical type of these is the red classic serape. So let me show you a couple others here. So here is another type of them. And this is a white field serape. So the design is totally just determined by the weaver. This one has beautiful design. And again, you can see a little further from a distance, you don't see as much of the red variation in the materials in it, but it definitely has quite a bit of variation in the material. So let's just see how this one looks on.
So the pink was carded with white.
It can be, but in this particular piece, it's just a lighter shade of red. But you can, which they did do a lot, was card the red with a white and got a pink and used it. But the deeper red was the most popular color. So, I didn't tell that story. I started to, but I realized I jumped the topic. But after we took over the Southwest under the Treaty of Hidalgo, and actually earlier, yes, in 1848. And so in 1849, we sent the first surveying expedition out to find out what we'd actually uncovered, because really basically everything west of the Rio Grande was unknown. It was all native territory, and they really didn't know what they had. And so in August 1st of 1849, a surveying expedition left out of Santa Fe under Colonel Simpson and Washington. And they headed to the Jemez Mountains. They went around the Jemez Mountains. They went out, they went to Chaco, and the cartographer drew all of the giant houses in Chaco in the first couple weeks of August of 1849, and they all have the same names, big houses that they do today. So I don't know if those names were there first or whether he actually named them, but all the names are included in those documents. Well, they continued west. They got across to the Badlands and continued. They knew that the Chuscas were kind of the Navajo sort of headquarters, and they got to the edge of the Chuscas. About 3 miles out in front of our trading post, they had the first so-called peace meeting between the Navajos and the U.S. troops. And, you know, I think 3,000 Navajos showed up. And so the troops were scared. There was a couple hundred of them, and they were kind of freaked out by it. And they set some cannons up on the hill and, you know, tried to protect themselves. They didn't know. They heard a lot of things about it, but basically, it's all recorded. You can read all of this if you have any interest in what the U.S. government said, what the Navajo said. It's all recorded. Basically, the government, U.S. government's position is that they are now part of a new country, and we will protect you. And that's what we're there to do. So the Navajo response was, really, give us all our women and children back that have been stolen by the Spanish and the other Indian tribes. And they said, well, we really can't do that. Well, it happens that one of the scouts, one of the Hispanic scouts that was leading the expedition, noticed one of the Navajos had a horse that he claimed was his. And he wanted his horse back. And so the Colonel Washington says to the head Navajo, he was 83 years old, named Narbona. And so Narbona called the man up and said, where did you get the horse? And he said, well, I bought him from this Mexican guy. And Narbona said, well, how much did you pay for him? And so he told him. So he tells Colonel Washington, if the guy wants to buy his horse back, he can. But he bought the horse fair and square, and it's his horse. It got tenser and tenser and tenser. The U.S. troops, right after promising peace, opened fire and killed 11 Navajos, including the 83-year-old chief. And basically, that ended the relationship between the United States government and Navajo. And when they got back to Santa Fe, they were told that that guy was a peace leader. And one time in the 1830s, a bunch of what are called enemy Navajos that are from out of Fort Tohajale is over on west of Albuquerque. They were called the enemy Navajo because they kind of led Spanish troops against the Navajo, and so they weren't liked by the Navajo. But they had gone and done on a raiding expedition and had stolen a bunch of horses. And Narbona and one other man took the horses. He found the Navajos that did it. He punished them. He took the horses. This is like 1836 or 1837. He rode him and himself back into Santa Fe and gave the horses to the governor. And so that's what the Spanish said. That's who they killed, the guy that was tried to do anything to keep peace. And so it didn't go well after that. And so what ensued was about 20 years of hard feelings between us. So this is a very particular type of blanket, and they were popular amongst the Pueblo Indians especially. And so a term, kind of a derogatory term for the Pueblo was moki. We see that term used a lot. And so this blanket earned that handle. So a moki blanket is determined by the use of the dark brown and blue stripes, which is actually a little more of a Hispanic trait. But this is what we call a moki serape. The red is all the big added. There's little accents of green in it. And so date the stage to about 1870, 1875. And you know I'm going to try it on. I think it's really fun to actually see how they really look. And so this is a pretty popular style of Navajo serape. And we see, quite a few of them. And some of them are just plain banded brown, blue, and white, but often they're a little more serapes by the putting all the serape designs. And basically, you see these are really just saltio diamonds, so this has a lot of Hispanic influence.
How many of them have an opening for the head versus straight over?
It jumped ahead of me. I'm sorry. There's a couple dozen that were emulating, Mexican serapes and being worn. They generally didn't do it, but they did it in a couple cases. So here you take this. This is a Navajo poncho. This is by far the best blanket I've ever bought in my 55 years of So this dates to about 1855. It's amazing how finely woven this is and how beautiful the design is. The next lot isn't completely opened up. But let me go back and point out something. Remember when I talked about pure classic design, Navajo design being pure classic? And I showed you the basket, and the only two designs are bands, terraced half diamonds. Okay, keep that in mind. Let's look at this blanket. It only consists of those two designs. So this is what we call a pure classic Navajo blanket. Terraced half diamonds put together, terraced half diamonds floating in thin bands.
But that was woven in one piece.
Yeah, this is woven in one piece. So the it's what's called a tapestry slit in the center. So it's woven in and it's salvaged just like the edges of the garment. It's very, very fine. Let's walk that all the way down there so people can get closer. No, you go first and we can. It's extremely fine. So this is my prize for 55 years. And put it in the way.
Yeah.
Not the first one.
But I'm
A good year, not more, because they're not expecting that everyone would speak meeting.
So these are bigger than the first phase on.
Yeah, this one is, they aren't all, this one happens to be an extremely large example.
But it was meant to be one step.
Oh, yeah. And it's not so big, it's more the size of a saltillo, but it's not that big. Those are 8 feet, I think this is only 7+ feet. And you know, if you actually take it and put it like in the horn, it's not really that long. So it barely goes to my knees. This is my treasure.
Would you take $20?
Yeah, right. Cash. So before I proceed, any questions? We're doing okay. Go ahead.
I'd like to know how you store these blankets to keep them.
I'll tell you how, but I won't tell you where. You know, we generally will roll them, and I'll roll a few of them together. We have racks that the rolls will come on, like we took this one off the roll, maybe before a lot of people arrived, but that's the best method, but it's a pain in the butt to look at them and stuff, and so I'll fold them. I have shelves and I'll fold them and put them, just not stack them too high so the pressure with one another doesn't hurt. But you know, I spend a lot of time with my blankets, and so I like easier access. The rolling is a little more of a pain. But if I know I'm putting stuff away for a while, we'll roll it up and we'll keep it from being creased. So, and you know, the best thing, the best way you can store them is where you see them. Use them, put them on your wall, put them on your floor. You know, people like put them in the closet of their bedroom and think they're helping it. That's where the bugs go. So they've learned that too. So as long as you're looking at them, you know that they're, you know, safe. But so many, I went to these old couple that had all these greenhouses in Denver once, and they had all these Navajo blankets. And, oh, they're really safe. We kept them in these trunks, and they opened the trunks, and the powder was always left. The moths had completely destroyed it. And they're, you know, and the moths are slow. They'll start chewing on stuff and show you that they're causing damage. But if you don't, as they multiply and multiply, they're just, you know, a frightening thing. Now, we have signs that say no malls allowed. Now, it works for the literate ones. But the illiterate ones are the problem. And we tend to blame the parents for it. But no, you know, you become a curator and you're kind of have to take care of them. And it's good if you're gonna hang them that you let the light change it. You don't put them in too bright rooms. Don't put them in direct sunlight. You know, there is some care to owning that's involved in carrying these things, because that blanket is 175 years old and you kind of want to keep it in nice condition. I strongly recommend it. Sir?
Down at SARS, their collection has blankets that you can't really handle because of some kind of poison that they wrap the blankets in.
Arsenic.
Arsenic.
Yeah, I'm on the board. I've been hired, I was taken on the board as a special textile advisor because I understand exactly what the problem is and stuff. And so we're addressing that problem now.
When did that start?
Well, it's basically it's carbon tetrachloride that was done to it. And there was a method that a lot of dry cleaners and stuff used called cyberized. And basically that's just putting arsenic in them. And so it was a bug proofing thing. But nobody really asked. And so, you know, when they asked me to be on the board, I said, so the curator said, well, you know, we got all these problems and everything. So my first question for her was, have you ever done any research on the long-term effects for keeping the arsenic in the blankets? And she says, what? I said, what if you open the cabinets and there's powder in there someday? That's the biggest question you should be asking. And the chair of the board was in the room and he looked at me, he goes, you want to be on our board? The curator didn't like it quite as much because I was challenging her ability to take really good care of them. And so we're working on, you can clean that out. The water that comes off that cleaning is hazmat, and so it needs to be dealt with especially. And basically, for cleaning most blankets, you can get a blanket clean for $300 or so. It basically doubles because of the special hazmat. It doubles the cost. It costs $600. And so you want to put in the question there.
Do you know any institutions that have enough wall space and floor space to keep the blankets in optimal conditions?
Well, your question is sort of twofold, because mainly I think, you know, keeping them rolled up is fine. So you don't really need floor space or anything to keep them. You just need to, basically all their blankets are rolled. If you've ever been in there and looked at all the things, were rolled and everything. So yeah, that's my job. One of my jobs right now is dealing with to address these issues. And I suggested to them that they start a program of Adopt a Blanket, where you get a picture of the Chief White Antelope blanket and you can put it on your wall. And so it costs you $500 or $600 and you can brag that you cleaned that blanket. And I'll tell you that's when the guy said, you really want to be on our board? And so they liked the idea, and we had a meeting Wednesday with them, you know, addressing these issues, because they're on like a $20 million restoration process right now. And they're going to build new facilities for storing their blankets, but they're also going to build a facility for viewing the blankets, and they're real interested in me looking at the blankets and picking out ideas for traveling exhibitions, to kind of putting certain stuff together that makes cohesive shows, and so they can be toured. So that's all in their future plans. Yeah.
What organization is it you're speaking of?
SARS.
What's that? The School of American Research. Or it's actually, they changed, it's always the School of American Research. Now it's the School of Advanced Research, because, you know, everything changes. I like School of American Research.
In Santa Fe, right?
It's in Santa Fe. Yeah, and it's on the corner of Old Santa Fe Trail. They have a great big, they have like 25 acres right there in downtown Santa Fe. And it was the White Sisters who were early day collectors who all that property used to belong to. And they started a Indian Arts Fund, and a lot of wealthy people in Santa Fe contributed to it. And so all those pots and all those baskets that they have were collected like in the 20s, 30s, 40s by a lot of rich people that was really good. They did because they saved a lot of really fantastic things. And then that collection got kind of split in what's now MIAC, which used to be a laboratory of anthropology. It's now called Museum of Indian Arts and Culture. And half of those blankets are in there and the other half went to SAR. So.
What about older saddle blankets that were used on horses? Do you like see sweat on them or salt?
Oh, yeah, how could you not really? Yeah, you know, if you ever ran that horse, you blank got sweated. But you know, they're just wool. You know, and it's one of the most practical, you know, fibers in the world. And you can clean them. You know, they clean fairly well. You know, they can be seriously stained where it can't be cleaned, but there's some really, the most competent cleaner we've ever had in my 55 years is a guy in Denver now. He's just very conscientious and he's super good. And so I'm trying to recommend that's who they use. There's bigger outfits that have fancier equipment, but this guy is just super sensitive and really likes it, and they kind of like that. He's a great guy. So, and for my plug, his name is Enver in Denver. Write that down. Tell him I sent you. And so nobody's really, he's the best cleaner we've ever had. And he's very sensitive. So, good. How are we doing for time? Well, half hour. Man, I can take a nap. So this we showed yesterday with the slave blankets because this is a Bosque Redondo serape. I showed the white serape and the red serape and the mochi serape and the poncho serape. So I'm just re-showing you this because this is what we call Bosque Redondo. These are all early. Here, let's go this way. These is all early, basically early Germantown yarns, the very first Germantown yarns. And this was made for a military officer who was stationed at Bosque Redondo. It became part of the Crane collection. It was all donated to the Denver, what was the Denver Museum of Natural History. I think maybe they changed the name now, but I got this. I traded a Navajo first phase, which was the blanket they always wanted. So I came up with one and they traded me a bunch of blankets for it. So I had this 25 years or so. And it has really good military history, collection history, so I was happy to get it.
Provenance.
What's that?
Some provenance.
Catch great provenance, yeah. And so underneath that tag still has the museum. Of course, you know, one of the things in the deal, they said I wasn't allowed to tell people where it came from. I said, yeah, fat chance of that. Sure, that's fine. So anyway, and so I'm kind of proud that it came from there, but they didn't want to know they were actually trading things, but they wanted the first phase. Far worse. And you know where the first phase came from, which is an amazing story. I was doing benefit appraisals for the museum. So people would come in and they'd pay $20 or $25 and I'd appraise things. I do this at museums all over the country. And I was in a room doing this and there was a guard in the other end of the room. And somebody brought me in a plain striped mochi blanket. And so it was just brown, blue, and white. And when that blanket came out of the bag of the lady's thing, the guard moved from the other side of the room at the door and came all over right by me. And so I noticed it. So I said to him, are you kind of like this blanket or interested in this for some reason? He goes, no, I have one at home. I go, oh, really? He goes, yeah, I have one at home. And I said, well, you know, you work at the museum. I'll appraise it for you tomorrow for free if you want to bring it in. He go, would you? And I go, oh, yeah, sure, bring it in. You know, the $20. He was happy he didn't have to pay the $20 for the institution he worked for. Well, he brings in his so-called mochi blanket in a bag, and I pull it out, and it's first phase chief blanket. It was brown, blue, and white, but the stripes ran the wrong way, and I almost died. And so the curator, who's sitting across the room, sees that first phase come out of the bag. She trips on her way running over to where it is. She immediately gets on the phone, calls her director, calls members of the board, and the next thing I know, I got like 17 people surrounding me looking at this blanket, and so at that time, I think it was worth about $75,000, because this was a long time ago, and I told them that. And they immediately started in on, well, we've been looking for this kind of blanket forever, and we'd really like you to give it to us, and, blue all this and that. He goes, excuse me, that kid just says it's worth $75,000. That's more money than I make in a year. I have no interest in giving it to you. No, you gotta. And so everything, and so it worked out that I paid him the $75,000 and agreed to trade it to the museum for stuff they had. And they had a certain amount of time to do it, which they didn't. The curator couldn't stand to trade something out of her collection, even though she was getting a much better blanket. It went on and on. It's a long story how it ended up. And so it finally ended up, but it was a pain in the butt. So anyway, the Navajos get herded up in 1864, and they're sent to their concentration camp, which is called Bosque Redondo, which they stayed for 4 years until 1868. Not my favorite part of the Navajo story, and so I don't really dwell on it. They did weave blankets while they were there for military officers and somewhat for their own use, but there was a big shortage of material. They didn't have the sheep. The government had destroyed most of the sheep. So anyway, when the Navajos were, it's really nice, we gave them back their own homeland. This is a pretty nice deal.
Well, after we didn't find any gold.
That's exactly right. A lot of people don't know that. The real reason they took them and herded them all up wasn't because of the raiding or anything. It's because there was a military officer who kept insisting, who was mostly, several guys, but they just insisted it was richer than California. And obviously California was pretty rich, and so they were. And so that's why they really herded them, and after 4 years, they realized there really wasn't any gold, so we might as well let them have their land back.
Only uranium.
They also destroyed the sheep. And so what you had was, 10,000 or so Navajos, half of which were probably women, half of which were very skilled weavers. And so they were weavers that had no weaving material. So about that same time, a mill to spun wools had started a few years before then, but a mill opened up in Philadelphia, in a place called Germantown, Pennsylvania. It's basically in the city limits of Philadelphia. But so this mill opened up, and so the government started buying thousands of pounds of commercial yarns and started distributing to the Navajo. And according to Joe Van Lee's studies, that probably within the next 10 to 15 years, about 80,000 pounds of yarn were given to the Navajos. Now that's according, Joe was always quick to point out, that's according to government records, which are probably the most inaccurate source of anything that you'd ever want to find. But those yarns came in a wide variety of colors. The Navajos, who had basically always been color-starved, went crazy. And so they started creating what we call Germantown eye-dazzlers. So here is one of the greatest examples of a Germantown eye-dazzler. And so I think there's 15 or 16 colors in this blanket. But they literally went crazy, doing all this. Now,
You stay with diamonds.
yeah, they're likened, but these are super, super popular with contemporary artists, Jasmine Johns, and Nolan, Tony Verlaine, Andy Warhol, all collected these because it reminded them of their own associations with color. The only difference was those guys could start painting and get halfway up it and just go, I don't like it, let's paint over it. The Navajo, time she got this far into it, she was months and months into the blanket. So there was no such thing as turning around. And so it's just amazing how beautiful balance, color-wise and design-wise it is. So this dates to about 1875, 1880.
I was just wondering what the Germantown wool was, what kind of wool.
Well, it was sheep wool, first off, but it it was a manufacturing, so they bought their wool from all over the world. They bought it from New Zealand one year, they bought it from Navajo one year. Wool is a commodity, so, they price shopped and bought their wools from basically everywhere. So we see the Germantown yarns in a lot of different qualities. And so, so we don't really know how to date it because of that, because nobody really ever kept track of those kind of things. There would have been a way had somebody kept track of yarns from this year. You could have said what year. But this was made probably about 1875.
Is the 3 yarn versus 4 yarn in addition?
Ply, you're mentioning ply. Well, that has to do with the manufacturing equipment of yarn. So the hand-spun yarns at that time were mostly 3-ply. And so the first manufacturing equipment of yarn in the Industrial Revolution was basically to copy what was being done by hand more efficiently. So that's why they started with 3-ply yarns and developed equipment that could do that. They soon realized that the 1, 2, 3 yarns being made into one was somewhat clumsy. And if they had 4 could go to 2 to 1. And so shortly, probably within 10 years, most of the 3-ply equipment became 4-ply. So that was the reason for that. And it is a little bit we can use, it is a little bit we can use to date yarns. The 3-ply is slightly earlier than the 4-ply, but considering shelf life and all kinds of things, that's not a lot of the guys think they really can date something like that, but it's not really as accurate as you might want to think.
I'm curious about the fringe on this. Is it added?
It's just
later?
added. It's just added, just to fancy it up more. Go ahead. I'll catch you in a second here.
Did they start using the synthetic dyes at the same time, or was that much later?
Basically, synthetic dyes were discovered in 1856 for silk and 1857 for wool, and it became a worldwide billion-dollar business, literally. And so those dyes got everywhere. And so Joe Van Wheat found those synthetic dyes on what were called guillas. So when the trains came up from Mexico, or the wagon trains that came up from Mexico, all that stuff was recorded. And so several places you had to stop, and the Mexican authorities would completely unload your wagon and make sure that you weren't smuggling things. And so those are called trade guillas. And a lot of the ones that came from Mexico City to Santa Fe are in the archives in Santa Fe. And so he went through those and he found the mention of those synthetic dyes by 1860, because it was just a few short years after they were discovered. But basically, any place in the world that wove got synthetic dyes and got commercial yarns.
That was my question.
Was it? So.
But not all of them are plied yarn.
Oh, no, just
Yeah.
Germantown.
Just the German.
Yeah, because and so, we also bought them, thousands of sheep out of the Rio Grande Valley, but they had, by 1859, the merino had been introduced. So the wool, Joe's term always for us, wool that the Navajos given after Bosque Uganda was contaminated. And the churro wool ceased to exist as it once was. And so that was you could kind of see that thing in the yarns. And again, when we see merino contamination in the wool, it has to be post 1859. So an 1830s blanket doesn't have merino wool in it. So it's kind of like Chevys. They had fins in 57 and they did in 58. So we can't exactly do things in 1 year periods, but we usually do plus or minus 5 or something like that.
Did you say the government was furnishing the Navajo with the wool?
Provided. Oh, yeah, initially. And it was an attempt because we were, obviously we were in the middle of the 1860s. We were kind of busy. Forget what we were doing. But, and so it was an attempt to kind of apologize for how badly they really treated the Navajo. Yeah.
In New England, there was a tremendous amount of wool industry, and during the Civil War, that's where most of the wool was coming from for uniforms and whatever. But going back just a little bit further with your data, Well, what was the main source for red? Because there was so much of it seems to be in your drawing.
Well, that's because the Navajos love red. But basically, we'll talk about Europe, okay? So madder was the dye red, and it was a pretty dull red, really. But red was the color of royalty, and so they used madder, and that's a vegetal dye. When the Moors conquered Spain, 600, 700, 800 AD, I don't remember the exact year that happened, but the Moors conquered Spain, and they brought a little scale insect dye called lac, and it became the rage of Europe. And so lac is a scale insect that is basically a relative of the cochineal beetle. When they discovered the New World had cochineal. And cochineal became the second largest export out of the New World historically. Second only to precious metals, almost as valuable pound for pound as silver was. And the Mexicans never wanted the Spanish to know it was just bug blood. It's carminic acid, basically. And so they never knew exactly what the source was, but it was red. And we were talking to some people mentioned yesterday how they know there's cochineal right here now. And I had a ranch in Arborez in southwest Colorado, and we had cochineal on that when I had that. And so, but it wasn't here then. It was further down south. And so that's a climate change thing that brought the cochineal this far north.
I have a question I almost asked yesterday, but didn't, about the Hudson Bay blankets that were red and black. Was there ever any trade of those blankets in this part of North America?
Well, they went mainly to like Canadian sources, and the French fur trapper and traders made it into the Southwest and traded. There's journals, you can see where they did that. And so they brought those things in, and I'm sure some of them ended up being traded to Navajo. And it's a little bit in a later sense, by the 1880s or so, the Navajos actually made copies of Hudson Bay blankets. There's quite a few of those that are just exact copies, the white with the bands on it and everything. And then they had a point system, they called it, where they had kind of bars that came in from the edge that were measured with the weight and value of the blanket. The Navajos included those in their blankets.
First seen at the Taos Trade Fair.
Very possibly.
Yeah, I wonder whether they had ever raveled the material of the Hudson Bay with lead.
Well, mostly those are, that's a technically difficult question. Because mostly in the later days, they are what are called woolen, as opposed to what is worsted. And so the woolen is, the furthest extent of woolen is felt. And so the Hudson Bay blankets, as you see that thick binding, didn't ravel very well. And so that wasn't really much of a source. And they were white, and the Navajos wanted red.
I'm talking about the red ones with the black stripe.
I'm not familiar with those. I'm sure they existed.
Yeah, they do.
I'm just not, she's my wife with me, she's smart. So, anyway, so here is a Germantown motif. Are we doing 10 minutes or something? 15.
I got all night.
Well, wait, at the end, I'm gonna steal 5 more of your minutes, and I'll bet you'll stay for it. So this is a Germantown motif, so this is about 1880 or so. And so the indigo has been replaced with purple aniline and black and red, and so this is, here. So this is period where the Germantown is usually called the transitional period. The first period of Navajo blanket is referred to the classic period. The classic period, they made blankets for their own use, for their own wearing, and they were widely, they were valuable, considered very valuable trade items, as I explained last night, that they were, by the Spanish, considered the most valuable trade item in the Southwest. That led to the slaving, so the rest is history. But when the Navajos returned, they didn't have many sheep, and so they started, building their sheep herds again. And then Anglo traders started moving into the reservation. Lorenzo Hubble was one of the first. And he was there in the 70s, 80s, and the 90s. And so other traders started moving into other places. Tisnos, Taos, all these places. One of them is our store we've run for 30 years now on the Navajo reservation. So each trader in his region, right, decided what he could get the local weavers to do and what he thought he could sell. So about 16 regional styles developed around 1900. Now Lorenzo Hubble said to his weavers, you can make it any color you want as long as it's red. And so there's different traders in different areas, these styles developed.
Were the traders trading with different clans?
Well, they would trade with all the clans that existed in their area.
So it wasn't, they weren't divided up by clan areas?
No, mostly the trade in Navajo was usually within about a 10 to 15 mile radius of the post is who traded there. And so in that, like in our area, we have about 20 clans that exist.
How many are there in total?
Well, there was maybe 80 first time, but a lot of them are now extinct because the elders of the clan died and they had to redo it again. And so, it's a question that a lot of people have different answers to, but around probably 80 clans. And so that's a really important thing for Navajo. Two Navajos walk up and meet, and the first thing they say is you have their mother clan, that's the primary clan that a Navajo is, and then the father's clan is a secondary clan, and then the grandfather's clan on the mother's side and the grandfather's clan on the mother's side and on the father's side. So if two Navajos meet, they will recite their clans to one another, and generally either have a clan that is similar so they know how they're related, or they'll have clans that are related to each other. So it's very complicated. I spent 25 years studying it. I know it very well. I know mostly every one of my weavers. I know their clans and everything. I always shocked into that, And I make up my names. Like Tabaha is Water Edge clan. And so I called them the Beach Boy clan. So, they love it when you goof on them. Especially use their language to kind of goof on them. They think it's really funny. So, anyway, there was a trader named J.B. Moore. And it was actually Lorenzo Hubble that produced the first catalog, and it was in the 1890s to market Navajo rugs. And then there was a trader about 15 miles from our post named J.B. Moore. And J.B. Moore published a catalog first in about 1903. It's undated, so it's speculated. But in 1911, this is heavy. In 1911, you keep it down for a second. In 1911, he published his most famous catalog. And there was 16 color plates, and you could order a rug in a design. You could pick the color if you wanted it. You could pick the size, and then he had 3 or 4 different values, that you could buy the cheaper one, you could buy the most expensive one. Now, this is an early J.B. Moore, what we call a storm pattern. You lift it up. And so the idea is this is the so-called center of the storm. Has 4 lightning bolts that go out to the 4 sacred mountains. So Moore considered, let's set it down for a second, Moore considered it a little bit of Navajo mythology, a little bit of trader ingenuity. And so this is what's called roving, and Moore was the first one that used it. So that means it was sent off the reservation as fleeces and was cleaned and carded, and it came back on these rolls, kind of thick about this big around, and the Navajo still has to split it off and hand spin it. So this is still hand spun, but look at the color. See how even the color is? That's a sign of roving. So he was the first one that used it. He says in 1912 he stopped doing it. But we don't know if he was, that was in a report to the government, so we didn't want to count on that. But this is an early J.B. Moore storm pattern. Not a catalog pattern, no. And so what he did was he picked rugs that he really liked, he put them in his catalog. The rest is kind of history. So Anyway, one of the posts that opened up was ours, Two Gray Hills Post, which sort of became the name of the rugs, was slightly before ours. It was opened in 1897. Our post opened in 1909. And so some good, East Coast ladies decided one time that they should do some East, Midwest kind of fairs. And so the first one was in 1911 at Shiprock. And the idea is all the Navajo artists and stuff would bring their art in there, kind of sponsored by the traders, and it was juried events, and so they gave ribbons out and all that kind of stuff. Now, Gallup Ceremonials was started, basically that was where Gallup Ceremonials started. They moved it to Gallup in 2 years. And then in 1921, Indian Market came along and was sort of a copy of it. Indian Market had a much better pretext because they were dealing more with the weavers. In the Gallup Fair, the ribbons went to the trader who worked the best with the weaver. So the trader actually got the ribbons, not the natives. And so when Indian Market started, they realized the fallacy of that. Gallup still runs by the same way. And Gallup was much bigger than Indian Market, but Indian Market, because of the way it's run, surpassed it. Now, I have photographs of the 1912 Shiprock Fair, and this rug is in the Two Gray Hills booth in that picture. So this is the earliest documented Two Gray Hills rug. It makes it kind of cool. And I also have one, I couldn't find it this morning, unfortunately, that's in the Totalina booth at the same year. So I have the earliest documented Two Gray and the earliest documented Totalina rug.
And then Totalina was 3 years old.
Yeah, well, it was a few years later, about 3 years old, yeah. And so basically, they're both the traders competed for the same weavers. They're all the same weavers.
Just shouts out his question.
What's that?
Mark White just shouts out questions.
I'm not dealing with it. So, anyway, so this is an area called Clagato. It's near Ganado, and so in these you usually see really classic early designs, but rather than being the background being red, it just has red accents. So this is all hand spun wool. This is probably 20s or so. It's a really great Navajo rug. Put it on your floor, it lasts forever. So literally. So these are some of the regional styles that developed. And so here is what's up near Four Corners. There's a place called Tisnos, possibly Circle of Cottonwoods. And right near it is a post called Red Mesa. And the trader at Red Mesa really liked the old eye dazzlers. And so he kind of encouraged that thought to keep. So this is a classic Red Mesa outline, about 1930s, 1940s.
Is that at Tisnos Pass?
What? This is Red Mesa, which is just, they're posts are only a few miles apart, so it's kind of hard to really distinguish it. Some people call them Tees outlines rather than Red Mesa, but this is really more a distinctive Red Mesa.
Who's the trader?
God, I don't know all the trader names. And then but later, if you ask me who started the post, I wouldn't know. But later, a lady named, it was Roscoe and Ruth McGee in Red Mesa. And Ruthie McGee was a Bloomfield. She grew up totally. So now here's a real fun Red Mesa. And this was made for a guy who was working on the reservation that had an Airstream trailer. This went down the hall of the trailer. I bought this thing years and years ago. I think it's just really, I just like that. Throwing it out. No, I think it's about 12 or so feet long, it's about 18 inches wide.
It's 19 by 105 inches, to be exact.
19 sounds close. So anyway, so around, let's see what else. So anyway, here's a T-Snooze Pass. This is a classic T-Snooze Pass. Oh, sorry.
How was that runner oriented on the looms like this?
Vertically.
Vertically?
Oh, yeah.
Somebody had to have a ladder.
Well, they have sneaky ways.
Explain that.
Yeah, of doing a backdrop. And if you could kind of imagine if it was with a much bigger rug, and once they got up a certain distance there, they loosened that bottom bar and they wrapped it around the bottom bar, right? And lowered the top so they could get to it. In essence, kind of a conveyor belt attitude. And so I have one of the loom stands like that is a backdrop. And we had it at the trading post, so we showed people how they made 9x12 rugs. So I had a couple weavers make me a couple of those that shows what they call them. And so when it's in that position, that's what the weavers call it, a backdrop position.
But they would set it up initially at that height?
Well, not necessarily, they had to string it up.
Right.
Okay, so when they strung it up, it was
the
probably
warp,
laying
so-
flat across the Hogan or something, and
Right.
they'd string it, but it maybe never got strung up and tensioned that way, it got already put into a backdrop position. So, you gotta spend 30 years. I was an expert when I hung out totally, but boy, have I learned a lot in 30 years. Probably 8,000 rugs from weavers, you kind of have a tendency to learn something. So these are the most orientalized looking of the Navajo rugs. This is from T-Snooze Pass of their four corners. And they tended to be very, very fancy, a lot of colors. And they were a very popular style. Unfortunately, it's kind of gone. The post is actually still open, but the trader doesn't really work with weavers or anything, whatever they bring in, and basically they bring in a lot of sort of dumb color rugs. So, nothing beautiful like this.
Did Depression and World War II, like shortages cause any short-term changes?
Oh, yeah, whatever happens, they're Americans too, so whatever happens definitely affects, it affects their market, even selling them. So they go through ebbs and tides and everything, and the different traders took over. I'll get you 1 second, hon. And so the different traders took over and they had their own influence, and so it was a constantly changing thing. And that's kind of like the fins on Chevys, those knowing and understanding those things that happen are what helps us date the pieces. So, is that good enough answer for you?
Yeah.
Okay.
When did pound rugs come up?
Well, that was a turn of the century issue, really, because rugs were bought and sold by the pound. And so the Navajos did everything they could to make it heavier. They would pound sand into them. Many a trader bought it. They didn't even look at the designs. They weighed the rug. And so a few traders, a lot of traders reported to, once they got it off the scale and the weaver got paid, they opened up this big rock inside. These guys aren't dumb. So anyway, here's another Clagato area piece. This is a much nicer one, really pretty. Is it? A couple more minutes. Pretty, huh? That's just a beautiful rug. That would go really nice in any living room. Okay, so anyway, there started a tradition in the central part of the reservation, Chinle, Crystal, and all those areas, to start. So the idea was, as a group of ladies got together that thought all the Navajos used vegetal dyes, and so they started having them, dig up plants and roots and everything and dye. It had nothing to do with what Navajos had ever done. But this is what we call a wide ruins, and these are all vegetal dyes. And they banded like the early blankets were. So it was really a revival of something that never actually happened. They weren't historically accurate. But it does have, you can see all those different subtle colors, and it's really quite beautiful. So, I just ran myself out of time to talk about my own weaving tradition. Here's one more. This is made by a really dear lady named Ella Rose Perry. It's a weaver we happen to know that does these. I don't think she's with us anymore, but we bought a few rugs from her. She came over the mountain to see us. She was only about a half hour from us, and I was involved in taking her to the Utah Museum of Natural History in 1980 to do weaving demonstrations for us. So anyway, this was an area out in the Bisbee Badlands. The trading post was called Bisbee, and they used interesting circles in the design. So anyway, so they're really famous for the circular designs that they had. Some of them are amazing, how cool circles are and stuff.
Excuse me. What time frame would you put?
Well, that's about 1935, say. Most of what we're looking at is sort of mid-20th century. I'm sorry, that was a good question, something I should have explained. So anyway, so with the traders in our region, both at Totaline and Two Gray Hills, found that the weavers didn't really like red. And so they started making, they would bring in rugs with just natural colors. And so when they really got going with the Shiprock Fair, which was in 1913, a Two Gray Hills won first prize. And the traders decided, wow, that's it. We can actually sell these rugs and make it nice. And so they started developing, I meant to bring a real early one to show you what they were, but this was the earliest one I brought, and this is probably from about 1940. So this is a classic Two Gray Hills rug. And so these are all natural shades of wool. And you can see the gold in its hand here. Its foot has actually faded a little, just like it does on the sheep's back. So it's a little darker on the side. And so they really started doing very precision designs, pattern borders, and single diamond, double diamond. This rug was made by a weaver named Yazzie Blackhorse. And Yazzie Blackhorse is the grandmother of our two employees at Totaline. So when I had already seen pictures of a rug, I knew it. When I saw this rug, I bought it. And I brought it in, and they ran and got their mother, and they took pictures of her mother with it and everything. And of course, it was folded up. When I pulled it out to show to Violet, their mother, she started crying when she saw it. She knew that was her mother's rug. So it's a fingerprint of their design. So.
I was just wondering if they're still wearing the blankets.
No, these are rugs.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the blankets went out with the Pendleton and all that, because the commercial blankets were real cheap and they didn't have to make them. So the traders shifted to them making rugs. I guess I didn't explain that, which I probably should have. So as long as you all caught that idea, that these are really rugs. Now,
You stop throwing them over your shoulder.
yeah, you stop, yeah.
That's true.
And so this is just a beautiful Two Gray Hills, made by a weaver by the name of Evelyn George. It's just a beautiful Two Gray. And she has the most beautiful sheet. She has all these colors, and this is all natural shades of wool, except the black in the border and a little bit in the center. All these colors, she has the most wonderful flock of sheep. The beautiful colors. She's 96 now, and she still weaves very little pieces, nothing really, and they're sad, because she's one of our great weavers for years and years. So.
Do you know Clyde McBride? He teaches veterinary science to
No, I'm not.
Shiprock now.
I'm not familiar with that name. Shiprock's an hour from us, and so that's like being on the other side of the world.
Right.
Really.
I noticed there's a brown line on the border. Do you want to explain that too?
Well, yeah, it's called the Spirit Trail. And so most people say, well, it's to let the evil spirits out. I ask who put them in the first place. So in my book, I have a part of a chapter on why they do this. And, I asked hundreds of weavers why they did it. And, you know, the one answer that always won out over any was, my mother told me to do it. But basically, the concept is, I'll get you 1 second. Basically, the concept, then they put everything in the rug. They put their heart and their soul and everything in the rug, and they don't want it to stay there. So it's called a spirit trail. So it's kind of a line. It's a connection from rug to rug to rug to rug. But, you know, if you ask 10 people, you're going to get 27 answers. But I've asked weavers, and that's kind of the answer we get. So where was the question?
That line is at the top of the weaving, at the end of the weaving,
That's the spirit line.
not the beginning.
No, it's not. Well, it's always at the top, unless it's at the beginning. You know, so each lady has a different story. I went to see a weaver one time who was a really good weaver, and we loaned her money, and we went to see the rug. We take pictures of them when they're being done, and the spirit line was at the beginning. And I said, Selena, you must be a really confused weaver. And I got offended. But what do you mean? I said, that spirit line's supposed to be at the end. Don't you know anything? And she said, my mother said, again, the end of the conversation, that it lets all my creativity into my rug. So there's just another variation of it. So anyway, we had a couple of really fantastic weavers at Tobalina, two of the best that ever lived. This is one of them. Her name was Bessie Minigoats. She was a top prize winner for years and years. And you can just kind of see the quality of her designs and how absolutely perfect they are.
Wow.
This is from probably about 1935 to 1945. Here's your spirit trail. And this is a storm pattern. So beautiful, beautiful rug, multiple borders. This was kind of the thing. So she would have been top prize winner at Gala ceremonials for quite a few years, but unfortunately, another lady came. And her name was Daisy Togglechi. She was a Tobalina lady. She lived a couple miles down from the post. And Daisy, I just got too dark out right now. But Daisy is considered the best Navajo weaver that ever lived. She won Gallup ceremonials 25 years in a row. First time. But anyway, let's get it over here and see if we can get it. Yeah. Now, a normal Navajo rug is 30 to 50 wefts per inch if you're counting vertical. This is 130 wefts per inch. Yeah, she was the queen and first came up with the tapestry design. And literally, sometimes I passed it around, but I don't trust anybody. Get over me, but actually, how unbelievable. Can I give you a job? Show it around and show people how unbelievably fine. And so she died in 1990, the first year I went out there starting to interview weavers. But her sister, she had a sister 2 years younger than her. Mildred Natani was her name, and Mildred told me that Daisy could spin wool by doing dishes. Because her wool was spun, and that's all hand spun. That's straight from the sheep, hand spun wool. So pretty impressive. Okay. You're right. All right. I got the coolest story I've ever found with a Navajo rug. All of you that want to leave can leave. I'll tell the story to myself. If you want to wait just a few minutes, I'm going to tell you a story you won't believe. So I had mentioned my first show was at the Utah Museum of Natural History in 1980 that I curated. And it was all on the whole Southwest weaving tradition. And so the director there, Donald Hay, became a very good friend, and he sent me to the Mormon families that helped take care of the Navajos. And so I got a lot of really neat things from all over Utah. He'd send me out dirt roads in southeastern Utah. He'd find things in Salt Lake City, and he liked me and trusted me and sent me on a lot of pretty good wild goose chases. This was the best one. So I went to see this family. The early family name was Summerhay. And here to we looked at the different colors throughout the only blue backgrounds throughout the others. I was so impressed with how beautiful it was, and all they had the greens and the kind of orangey and yellow colors are all together too. But sitting in the living room and talking to him and everything, and they go, "What's the story with the blanket?" And I'm going, "Okay." Now, I'm gonna say the story a little bit of a silly way, you can kind of, thank you very much. And so, but you'll get the idea, okay? So, they were part of the Mormon families that settled southeastern Utah. So they were down there in the, whenever that was, 1850s, 1860s, which is how the blanket really dates. And the men were outside working, the women were inside cooking and everything. And a group of Utes rode up. And so they knew the Utes and everything, there was some communication with them and everything, but they tucked all the women in the log cabin and the men went out there with their guns and to, talk to them, see what they wanted. And so the Utes asked for guns. We need some guns. And they said, "Well, if we give you guns, you might shoot us. It's probably not a good idea, guys. Sorry." They said, "Oh no, you're men of God. We're not going to shoot you. You're not who we want. We want the guns for the Navajos. So we use them against the Navajos." And they said, "Well, we kind of like the Navajos, and so, which they kind of adopted that tribe. And so it kind of reached a stalemate, and they weren't going to, the Mormon men weren't going to give them any guns, but they had their own. And so the head of the Ute tribe kind of waves to somebody in the band, and he comes up and he has a Navajo blanket, that Navajo blanket, in a bundle. He takes the bundle, he throws it on the ground in front of the Mormon men, he opens it up, and there's a baby. And it was a baby they just stolen from the Navajo. And they said, "If you don't give us guns, we're going to kill the baby." And they're going, "Well, we don't, we can't really deal with that." So one of them Utes comes up with a big club, and he's about ready to club the little baby. And the women all come running out of the log cabin going, "No, you can't kill a baby. They can't kill a baby." And the men were going, "We're not giving them guns." And so they finally agreed to give them 2 guns for the blanket and the baby. And they raised the baby till she was about 15 years old, and she ran off with an Indian kid that came through one time, but they kept the blanket. Is that an amazing story? It's the best one I ever heard. So it was just a great story. So I've had that since the 80s, I think. Oh my God. So, wow. So that is what we call provenance.
What kind of guns were they?
Yeah. So anyway, thank you so much for coming. We really enjoyed it.
So thank you, Mark. Again, another amazing installation, and I learned unbelievable amount every time.
Yeah, we shifted up too.
Yeah, and I want to mention, in addition to Mark's knowledge that you've seen here tonight and building what is arguably the most preeminent American Southwest textile and Northern Mexican textile collection, Mark has also created the largest textile database that exists
On Saltillos.
on Saltillos. But when you combine all the other textiles
Yeah,
as
well,
well,
we have a little more information about them too.
yeah, it turns into a pretty impressive database. And the long-term goal is to bring all of this into a public collection so that all of this material information will be accessible for generations to come. So that'll
Was
be
that a plug?
just a little. That'll be a significant contribution to the humanities and the legacy that these weavings represent to our cultural traditions. So thank you, Mark. Thank you, everyone, for coming. There is food still available in the Research Center, the Luna Chapel, and the main exhibition space will be open till 6, so feel free to linger. The next talk is February 14th by Juanita Labadie on weaving in El Valle, Northern New Mexico weaving traditions. So please come back for that, and thank you.